A little girl about to make a drastic decision makes an emergency call. A CEO answers. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The wind whipped through 7-year-old Mia's blonde hair as she stood on the rooftop of Sterling Tower, her small arms wrapped protectively around 1-year-old Tommy, who gurgled softly against her shoulder. The city stretched out below them like a glittering maze, but all Mia could think about was the empty refrigerator back home and Rick's angry words echoing in her mind. If you can't earn your keep, maybe you don't deserve to eat at all. Getting to the rooftop hadn't been easy. For weeks, Mia had been following her mother Carmen to work at Sterling Tower, where she worked as a night janitor. Mia had memorized her mother's routine. Carmen would use her employee keycard to enter through the service entrance at 10 p.m., take the service elevator to start on floor 50, then work her way up. Tonight, Mia had waited until Carmen was distracted by a spilled coffee situation on the 60th floor, then slipped into the stairwell marked Authorized Personnel Only. The magnetic lock on the stairwell door had been broken for 3 days, something Carmen had reported to maintenance but hadn't been fixed yet due to budget cuts. Mia didn't understand building security systems, but she knew that some doors opened when you pushed them and others didn't. This one had opened. The climb to the top had taken her nearly an hour, with baby Tommy getting heavier in her arms with each flight. But Mia was determined. Rick had made it clear that morning that they were running out of chances. "Your mama's paycheck barely covers the rent I've been covering for you people," he'd said, counting the bills Carmen had handed over. "And with winter coming, heat bills are going up. Maybe it's time to make some hard decisions about whether this arrangement is working out." Her tiny fingers trembled as she pulled out the phone she'd taken from her mother's purse. Carmen was somewhere far below, probably panicking about the missing phone by now, completely unaware that her children had somehow made it all the way to the top of the building where she worked. "I'm sorry, Tommy," she whispered to her baby brother, whose bright blue eyes looked up at her with complete trust. "But Rick said we're just burdens. Maybe Mommy will be happier without us costing so much money." Her small hands shook as she tried to dial 911. She'd practiced the numbers on an old broken phone at home, but in her panic, and with the wind making her fingers numb, she pressed the wrong sequence. Instead of 911, her 7-year-old fingers pressed 913, then the extension number she'd seen on a business card that had fallen from her mother's cleaning supplies, David Sterling's direct line. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Sterling here," came a deep, authoritative voice that made Mia's heart skip a beat. This didn't sound like the emergency operators she'd heard on television. "Please," Mia sobbed into the phone, her voice barely audible over the wind. "I need help. My baby brother and I. We're on a really tall building and I don't know what to do anymore." David Sterling had been reviewing quarterly reports in his office on the 98th floor when his private line rang. At 38, he was used to crisis calls from business partners, but something about this small, terrified voice made him freeze completely. "Slow down, sweetheart. What's your name and where exactly are you?" "I'm Mia, and Tommy is my baby brother. We're on top of a big building with lots of windows. Rick says we cost too much money and that Mommy would be better without us eating her food. He makes us ask permission for every piece of bread, and sometimes there isn't any." Her voice cracked with exhaustion and despair. David's blood ran cold, and he immediately thought of his building's security systems. "Mia, can you see any signs or letters on buildings around you? Any words on the building you're standing on?" "There's a big S on the building across from us," she said, her voice getting smaller. And the building we're on has shiny letters that spell STER. I can't read the rest from up here." David's heart stopped. He was looking out his office window right now, and the building across from Sterling Tower did indeed have a large S on it, the Stratton Building. If someone was on his rooftop. He immediately called building security while keeping Mia on the line. "Marcus, I need you to check if anyone has accessed the roof. Emergency situation," he said quickly into his desk phone, then returned to Mia. "Mia, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I think I know exactly where you are, and I'm going to help you, okay? But I need you to step away from the edge and sit down with Tommy right now." But you don't understand," Mia cried. "Rick says we eat too much food and cost too much money. Mommy works so hard cleaning offices, but it's never enough. She cries when she thinks we can't see her. Yesterday, she didn't eat dinner at all so Tommy could have formula. Maybe if Tommy and I weren't here." "No, Mia, listen to me." David's voice was firm, but gentle as he moved toward his office door. "Whatever problems your family has, they can be solved. But not if something happens to you and Tommy. You're not worthless. You're precious. Your mommy loves you more than anything in the world." His security chief called back, "Mr. Sterling, we have a situation. The stairwell door lock on floor 85 has been malfunctioning for 3 days. Someone could have accessed the roof stairs from there. I'm sending a team up now." "Tell them to be extremely careful and quiet," David instructed. "There's a 7-year-old child on the roof in crisis." As David headed toward the emergency stairwell himself, his mind raced. A janitor, he thought. A woman struggling to feed her children while cleaning offices in his building. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. While he sat in luxury 98 floors up, a desperate mother was working below him, so financially trapped that her daughter saw death as preferable to being a burden. "I'm scared," Mia whispered, and David could hear Tommy starting to fuss in the background. "I know you are, sweetheart, but guess what? I'm almost there. I'm going to open a door in just a few seconds, and when I do, I want you to walk toward me very slowly, okay? Can you do that for me?" David carefully pushed open the rooftop access door, his heart hammering as he saw the small figure silhouetted against the night sky. Mia turned toward him, her face streaked with tears, blonde hair wild from the wind. In her arms, baby Tommy looked around with curious eyes, completely unaware of the danger they were in. "Are you the man from the phone?" Mia asked, taking a tentative step away from the ledge. "Yes, I am. My name is David. Can you come a little closer to me?" He kept his voice calm and steady, even though inside he was terrified. One wrong move, one startled reaction, and he could lose them both. As Mia walked toward him, David noticed her clothes. Threadbare jeans that were too small, a thin sweater with holes in the elbows, shoes that had seen better days months ago. This child was living in poverty in one of the richest cities in the world, and she was so desperate that she'd contemplated the unthinkable. "That's it. You're doing great," David encouraged as she came within arm's reach. Gently, he extended his hands. "Can I help you with Tommy? He looks heavy for such a little girl to carry." Mia nodded and carefully transferred her baby brother to David's arms. Tommy immediately reached up and grabbed David's tie, gurgling happily. The sight of this innocent child, so trusting and unaware, nearly broke David's heart. "Now, Mia, let's sit down right here away from the edge and talk, okay?" David settled onto the rooftop with Tommy in his lap, positioning himself between the children and the ledge. "Tell me about your mommy." "Her name is Carmen Rodriguez, and she's the best mommy in the whole world," Mia said, sitting close to David. "But she's so sad all the time now. She works here at night, cleaning offices, but Rick says it's not enough money. He makes her give him every dollar she earns, and then he says mean things to us about costing too much." David felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice gentle. "How long has Rick been living with you and your mommy?" "Since I was 6. Mommy said he would help take care of us after Daddy went to heaven, but Rick just yells and makes us stay in our room. Sometimes he locks the refrigerator and says we can only eat what he gives us permission to eat. The picture was becoming clearer, and David felt a rage building inside him that he hadn't experienced in years. But he also felt something else, a nagging sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. "Mia, does your mummy know you're up here?" "No, she's working downstairs. I follow her to work sometimes because I know which offices have snack machines, and sometimes people leave half-eaten sandwiches in the trash. But I got lost tonight, trying to find her after she went to clean the coffee mess on 60, and then I found the broken door that goes to the stairs that go up, up, up." David made a mental note about the security failure that had enabled this crisis. "Mia, what Rick is doing to you and Tommy and your mommy is wrong. Adults are supposed to take care of children, not make them beg for food. But Rick says we're too expensive and that Mommy made a promise to pay him back for helping us," Mia said matter-of-factly, as if she'd accepted this as truth. "Pay him back for what?" David asked, suddenly alert. "I don't know. Something about Daddy's hospital bills and money Rick gave Mommy when Daddy died. He has papers that he shows Mommy when she cries about wanting to leave." David felt a chill of recognition. This sounded like something more than just an abusive relationship. It sounded like systematic financial exploitation, possibly even debt bondage. "Rick is lying about what you're worth," David said firmly. "Children aren't expenses, they're gifts. And you, Mia, are a very special gift." For the first time since he'd found her, Mia smiled slightly. "You really think so?" "I know so." David looked down at Tommy, who had fallen asleep in his arms, tiny fingers still clutching his tie. "Tell me, Mia, how long has your mommy been working in this building?" "Since before Tommy was born. She got this job after she had to stop working at the hotel because her boss was mean. But she was happy about this job because it paid more money. She said maybe things would get better, but then Rick came, and now nothing ever gets better." A hotel. Something about that detail nagged at David's memory, but he couldn't quite place it. "Do you know which hotel she used to work at?" "The fancy one downtown with the gold doors. Mommy said rich people stayed there and sometimes they were nice to the cleaning ladies. She told me she even helped save someone's life there once, like a hero." The words hit David like a physical blow. The fancy hotel downtown with gold doors. That could only be the Grand Chicago Hotel, and someone whose life was saved by a cleaning lady. Suddenly, David was transported back 5 years to a rainy night in downtown Chicago. He'd been there for a business merger, staying at the Grand Chicago, working late in his hotel room when he'd gone down to his car in the parking garage. 3 men had attacked him, beaten him severely, and left him for dead behind a concrete pillar where security cameras couldn't see. He remembered lying there barely conscious when gentle hands had touched his face, and a soft voice with a slight accent had said, "Don't worry, I'm going to get help. You're not alone." The woman, Carmen, the nurses had told him later, had used her own phone to call 911 and stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. When he'd tried to thank her at the hospital, she was already gone. She'd refused any reward, telling the nurses she'd just wanted to make sure he was okay. He'd tried desperately to find her afterward, wanting to properly thank her and help her financially. But the hotel management had been uncooperative about giving out employee information for privacy reasons. His search had led nowhere, and eventually he'd been forced to give up, always wondering what had happened to the angel who had saved his life. "Mia," David said carefully, his voice slightly hoarse, "do you know what happened to the person your mommy saved at the hotel? She said he got better and went back to his family. Mommy said it made her feel really good to help someone, but then she had to leave the hotel job because the manager started being mean to her after that." David's mind was reeling. The woman whose children he now held, whose daughter had just nearly jumped from his building, was Carmen Rodriguez, the same Carmen who had saved his life 5 years ago. The universe had just revealed the most incredible connection he could have imagined. "Are you okay?" Mia asked, noticing that David had gone very quiet. "Yes, sweetheart. I think I might have met your mommy before." "Really? That's so cool. Was she nice to you too?" "She was the nicest person I'd ever met," David said softly. "Mia, when we find your mommy, I want you to let me talk to her first, okay? She might be scared or confused about why you're with me." "Okay." "Will you tell her that Tommy and I are sorry for taking her phone and leaving without permission?" "You don't need to be sorry for anything," David said firmly. "You were trying to take care of your baby brother because no one else was. That makes you incredibly brave." David's security team had been waiting patiently in the stairwell, and now Marcus's voice came through David's radio. "Mr. Sterling, we've located Mrs. Rodriguez on the 60th floor. She's very distressed about her missing children and phone." "Tell her we found them and they're safe," David instructed. "Have her meet us at the private elevator on 98. As they prepared to leave the rooftop, David looked at these two innocent children who had unknowingly reunited him with the woman who had changed his life forever. Carmen Rodriguez had saved him once before. Now it was his turn to save her, too. David's private elevator descended smoothly toward the 60th floor, where Carmen Rodriguez was waiting with two security guards who had been trying to calm her panic. Mia sat quietly beside David, still holding his hand, while Tommy dozed in David's arms, completely unaware of the life-changing reunion that was about to occur. "Is Mommy going to be mad at us?" Mia asked, voicing the fear that had been building as they descended. "Your mommy is going to be relieved that you're safe," David assured her. "She's probably been worried sick." But when the elevator doors opened on the 60th floor, David saw Carmen Rodriguez pacing frantically near the security desk, her janitor's uniform wrinkled, her long dark hair falling out of its ponytail. Even in distress, even after 5 years, he recognized her immediately. The same kind face, the same gentle hands that had touched his face in that parking garage, though now marked by years of worry and hardship. "Mia! Tommy!" Carmen gasped, rushing toward them. Then she stopped short, taking in the sight of her children with this expensively dressed stranger. Her eyes darted between David and the security guards, confusion and fear warring with relief on her face. "Mrs. Rodriguez," David said gently, "I'm David Sterling. I own this building. Your daughter called my private line tonight, and I found her and your son on the rooftop." Carmen's face went white as paper. "The rooftop? Mia? What were you thinking? You could have been killed, and Tommy." She reached for her baby, and David carefully transferred him to her arms. "I'm sorry, Mommy," Mia said, tears starting again. "But Rick said we were too expensive and that you'd be better off without us. I thought maybe if Tommy and I went away, you wouldn't have to work so hard and cry so much." "Oh, mija," Carmen said, sinking into a nearby chair with Tommy clutched against her chest. "Never think that. Never ever think that. Never. You and Tommy are the only reason I get up every morning." David watched the reunion with a mixture of joy and heartbreak, but also with a growing sense of unreality. Here was Carmen Rodriguez, the woman he'd been searching for, working as a janitor in his own building, while he sat in ignorance 98 floors above her. "Mrs. Rodriguez," David said carefully, "I think we need to talk, but not here. Would you be willing to come up to my office? I can have someone cover the rest of your shift." Carmen looked at him suspiciously. This was clearly a very wealthy, powerful man, and in her experience, such men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. "I can't afford to lose this job, Mr. Sterling, if I don't finish my cleaning route." "You won't lose your job," David assured her. "I give you my word. But Carmen—" He paused, using her first name intentionally. "5 years ago, you saved a man's life in the parking garage of the Grand Chicago Hotel. That man was me." Carmen's eyes widened in shock, and she studied David's face more carefully. 5 years older, more successful looking, but the bone structure was the same. The eye color. The businessman with the head injury. You were bleeding so much. You stayed with me until the paramedics came. You held my hand and told me I wasn't alone, that someone was waiting for me at home. David's voice was thick with emotion. Because of you, I survived that night. I've been looking for you ever since. Tears began streaming down Carmen's face. You were looking for me, but why? Because you saved my life, Carmen. You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain by helping me, but you stayed anyway. You made sure a stranger didn't die alone in a parking garage. David's voice grew stronger. I wanted to thank you properly. I wanted to repay your kindness. I had no idea you were working in my own building. Mia looked back and forth between her mother and David, sensing something important happening. Mommy, why are you crying again? These are different tears, Mija, Carmen said, wiping her eyes. Sometimes people cry when something wonderful and impossible happens at the same time. David knelt down to Mia's level. Your mommy is a hero, Mia. She saved my life. Just like tonight, she saved yours by raising you to be brave enough to ask for help when you needed it. Really? Mia's eyes went wide. My mommy is a real hero. The most real kind, David confirmed. Carmen was still struggling to process this revelation. Mr. Sterling, I don't understand. You said you were looking for me? For 5 years, I hired investigators, contacted the hotel repeatedly, searched through employment records. The trail always went cold. When you left the Grand Chicago, it was like you disappeared. Carmen's expression grew troubled. I had to leave that job quickly. After the night I helped you, the hotel manager became suspicious about how I knew you were in the garage. He thought maybe I was involved with the people who attacked you, or that I was trying to get money from you. He made my job impossible, spreading rumors about me to the other staff. I had to quit. David felt a surge of anger at the injustice. Carmen, I tried to leave information at the hotel about wanting to thank you and help you. They told me you'd refused any contact. I never got any message like that, Carmen said, confused. I had to find work quickly. I was pregnant with Tommy and I couldn't afford to be unemployed. The pieces were falling into place, a hotel management more concerned with covering their liability than helping their employee, a woman too proud to ask for help, and a man whose good intentions had been thwarted by bureaucracy and miscommunication. Carmen, David said, his voice gentle but urgent, I need you to tell me about Rick. Mia mentioned some troubling things. Carmen's expression immediately closed off, the walls going up. Rick is. He's been helping me since my husband died. It's complicated. Mommy, you don't have to pretend with David, Mia said with 7-year-old directness. David is nice. He won't hurt us like Rick does. Rick doesn't hurt us, Carmen said quickly, but David could see the lie in her eyes. Carmen, Mia told me that Rick takes your paychecks, controls your food, and makes the children feel like burdens. She mentioned papers he has, some kind of debt arrangement. Carmen was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Tommy, who had woken up and was looking around with curious eyes. After my husband Miguel died, the medical bills were crushing. I was pregnant with Tommy, working 3 jobs just to pay rent. I was about to lose our apartment. She took a shaky breath. Rick seemed kind at first. He said he'd heard about my situation through a friend, that he helped women in difficult circumstances. He offered to pay off Miguel's medical debts and cover our living expenses while I got back on my feet after Tommy was born. What did he ask for in return? David asked, though he was beginning to dread the answer. I signed papers saying I would pay him back through household contributions and labor. At the time, it seemed reasonable. He was offering to invest $15,000 in our future. But after Tommy was born, he changed the terms? Everything changed. The household contributions became complete financial control. The labor became more than just housework. He started having business associates stay at our apartment, and I was expected to clean, cook, serve them meals, do their laundry. He said it was all part of my debt service. David felt his jaw clench. This was sounding more and more like a textbook case of debt bondage. Carmen, what kind of business associates? Carmen looked around nervously, as if Rick might be listening. I don't ask questions about Rick's business, but they're not construction workers like he claims to be. They dress too well, carry too much cash, and they have meetings late at night that I'm not supposed to overhear. Has Rick ever threatened you or the children? Not directly. But he makes it clear that without his financial support, we'd be homeless. He keeps detailed records of every dollar spent on us: rent, groceries, utilities, even Tommy's diapers. He says we owe him more money every month, not less. David was taking mental notes, recognizing the classic patterns of financial abuse and possible human trafficking. Carmen, how much does Rick claim you owe him now? Almost $25,000. He says with interest and living expenses, the debt keeps growing despite my payments. David's mind reeled. This was definitely illegal debt bondage, designed to keep Carmen trapped indefinitely. Carmen, I need you to understand something. What Rick is doing to you is called human trafficking through debt bondage. It's a federal crime. But I agreed to the arrangement, Carmen protested weakly. You agreed under duress, while grieving your husband and facing homelessness with a child. That's not true consent, especially when the terms were misrepresented. David's voice was firm but compassionate. Carmen, you're not just my employee. You're the woman who saved my life. I will not let anyone continue to exploit you. But if I leave Rick, where will we go? I can't afford an apartment on my own, and with Tommy needing childcare. Carmen, look at me, David said intently. 5 years ago, you didn't hesitate to help a bleeding stranger. You stayed with me when you could have walked away. You made sure I wasn't alone in what could have been my final moments. Now let me do the same for you. I can't accept charity, Carmen said immediately, the pride that had sustained her through years of hardship flaring up. This isn't charity. This is a debt I've owed you for 5 years. And more than that, Carmen, you saved my life. Every success I've achieved, every good thing that's happened to me since that night, exists because you took the time to help a stranger. Mia had been listening to this entire conversation with wide, intelligent eyes. Now she tugged on David's sleeve. David, does this mean you're going to help us get away from Rick? David looked down at the brave 7-year-old who had nearly sacrificed herself and her baby brother, rather than continue being what she thought was a burden. Yes, Mia. I'm going to make sure you and Tommy never have to hide from angry voices again, and that your mommy never has to choose between feeding you and paying rent. Really, really? Mia asked, hope flickering in her young eyes. Really, really, David confirmed. But first we need to make a plan. Carmen, does Rick know where you are right now? Carmen checked the clock on the wall. He thinks I'm at work until 3 a.m. He doesn't usually check on me during my shift. Good, that gives us time. David stood up, decision made. Carmen, I'm taking you and the children somewhere safe tonight. Tomorrow, we're going to call some people who can help us make sure Rick never hurts your family again. Where will we go? Carmen asked, uncertainty warring with desperate hope. David thought about his penthouse apartment, empty and luxurious, waiting for a family to make it a home. Somewhere Rick can't find you. Somewhere you can remember what it feels like to make decisions for yourself. As they gathered Carmen's cleaning supplies and prepared to leave, Mia slipped her small hand into David's again. David, are you really going to be our friend forever? David squeezed her tiny hand, thinking about the incredible chain of events that had brought them all together. A parking garage 5 years ago, a broken door lock, a misdiated phone number, and 2 children brave enough to climb 98 flights of stairs in search of hope. "Forever and always, Mia," he said softly. "Forever and always." David's penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of Sterling Tower, accessible only by private elevator. As the doors opened directly into his living space, Carmen couldn't help but gasp, despite her exhaustion and emotional turmoil. The apartment was beautiful, modern but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 360-degree view of the city, tasteful artwork, and furniture that probably cost more than she'd earned in the past year. "Welcome to my home," David said, watching Carmen's reaction carefully. He could see her struggling between amazement and discomfort, the weight of accepting help from someone so clearly wealthy beyond her comprehension. Mia was less conflicted, practically bouncing as she looked around. "This is like the castles in my storybooks. Tommy, look how high up we are." But Carmen was overwhelmed, sinking onto the leather couch with Tommy in her arms. "David, this is too much. We don't belong in a place like this." "Hey," David said gently, sitting across from her. "Remember what I said about deserving good things? This isn't about belonging or not belonging. This is about safety, and about giving you space to figure out what comes next, without Rick's influence." David's phone buzzed, a text from his head of security. He read it and frowned. "What is it?" Carmen asked, noticing his expression change. "Building security reports that a man came by about an hour ago asking about you. He told them you'd taken something that belonged to him and demanded to know if you were still in the building." Carmen's face went white. "Rick. But how did he know I was even here? I never told him exactly which building I work in." "He probably followed you one night," David said grimly. "Carmen, did you tell him anything about tonight? About the children being missing?" "No, Carmen paused, thinking. "When I couldn't find my phone, I used the supervisor's phone to call home. I got the answering machine and left a message saying there was an emergency at work and I might be late." "What kind of emergency did you say?" "Just that there was a situation I had to help with." "But David, Rick always gets suspicious when my routine changes, if he thinks I'm lying about something." David's phone buzzed again with another message from security. Man returned with documentation claiming Rodriguez owes him money and stole cash from shared account, demanding police involvement to recover stolen property. "Carmen," David said carefully, "Rick is downstairs right now claiming you stole money from him. He's got papers and he's demanding that building security call the police." Carmen began shaking. "The emergency money. I took my emergency fund from the hiding place under my bed. $300 I'd been saving from tips and small bills I could hide. But David, that money was mine. I earned it from extra cleaning jobs Rick didn't know about." "How much does Rick claim you took?" "If he's following his usual pattern, he'll claim I took everything in our household account, probably $1,500, and that I owe him for breaking our agreement." Carmen's voice was tight with fear. "He always inflates the numbers when he wants to control me." David felt his anger building, but he kept his voice calm. "Carmen, before we deal with Rick, I need to ask you some specific questions about your arrangement with him. The answers will help determine how we handle this legally." Carmen nodded, adjusting Tommy in her arms. "You mentioned that Rick has business associates who stay at your apartment. Can you tell me more about what you were expected to do for them?" Carmen looked uncomfortable. "Rick said it was part of my debt service. When his associates came for meetings, I had to clean guest rooms, prepare meals, serve drinks during their meetings, clean up afterward. Sometimes they stayed for several days." "Were you ever alone with these men?" "Rick usually stayed in the apartment, but yes, sometimes I had to serve them meals or clean rooms while he was out. Some of them made comments about me, about how Rick had good taste in choosing help. One man offered Rick money to extend my services." David's blood ran cold. "What did Rick say to that?" He said I wasn't available for that kind of work, but he said it in a way that made it sound like it was his decision to make, not mine. Carmen, did Rick ever explicitly say that you could work off your debt and be free of the arrangement? In the beginning, he said, when I paid back the $15,000 plus reasonable interest, we'd renegotiate our living situation. But every month he shows me papers proving I owe more money, not less. He says, my living expenses and the children's care cost more than I contribute. David was taking notes, recognizing textbook debt bondage tactics. Has Rick ever restricted your movement, controlled who you could talk to or where you could go? I'm not allowed to discuss our arrangement with anyone. He says it's private family business. I can't take jobs he doesn't approve of. I have to account for my time when I'm not working, and I can't take the children anywhere without his permission. What about identification documents, birth certificates, social security cards? Carmen's expression grew troubled. Rick keeps all our important papers in his safe. He says it's for security, but I haven't seen Tommy's birth certificate since Rick took it for safekeeping when Tommy was 3 months old. David set down his pen, the full scope of Carmen's situation becoming clear. Carmen, what Rick has done to you meets the federal definition of human trafficking through debt bondage. The false debt inflation, document control, labor for third parties, restrictions on movement. This is a serious federal crime. But I wasn't chained up or locked in a room, Carmen protested. I could leave the apartment for work. Human trafficking doesn't require physical restraints. Controlling someone through false debt, document theft, and threats of homelessness is just as effective as chains. David's voice was gentle but firm. Carmen, you've been systematically exploited and trafficked. Rick is a criminal. Before Carmen could fully process this revelation, David's phone rang, building security again. Mr. Sterling, the situation downstairs is escalating. Rick Morrison is now here with 2 other men, and they're demanding access to Mrs. Rodriguez. They claim she's violated a legal contract, and they have the right to recover their property. Their property? David's voice was ice cold. That's what they said, sir. Morrison is claiming Mrs. Rodriguez is bound by legal agreements that require her to return to their residence immediately. David looked at Carmen, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. She was holding Tommy so tightly that the baby began to fuss. Marcus, under no circumstances is anyone to have access to Mrs. Rodriguez or her children. Tell Morrison that Mrs. Rodriguez is under the protection of legal counsel, and any further contact must go through her attorney. He's demanding to know what authority you have to interfere in his family business, sir. Tell him he's about to find out. David hung up and immediately dialed another number. Patricia Kane, please tell her David Sterling needs emergency assistance with a human trafficking situation. Carmen stared at him in shock. Human trafficking? David, that sounds so serious, so criminal. Because it is serious and criminal, David said firmly. Carmen, Rick didn't just take advantage of you financially. He systematically destroyed your independence, exploited your labor, controlled your movements, and held your children hostage to your compliance. That's not helping someone in need. That's trafficking. Patricia Kane agreed to come immediately, and David hung up with relief, but Carmen was spiraling into panic. What if the police believe Rick's story instead of mine? What if they think I really did steal from him? What if they take Tommy away because I've been living in an illegal situation? Carmen, breathe, David said, moving to sit beside her. You're not in trouble. You're the victim here. Rick is the one who's been breaking federal law. But I signed papers. I agreed to live with him. You agreed to a legitimate debt repayment plan. Rick turned it into trafficking by changing the terms, inflating the debt, and exploiting your labor. That's on him, not you. Mia had been quietly coloring at David's dining table, but now she came over to where they were sitting. Mommy, are you scared of Rick again? Carmen pulled her daughter close with her free arm. A little, Mija, but David is going to help us make sure Rick can't scare us anymore. Good, Mia said firmly. Rick is mean, and he made you cry too much. I like David better. David felt his heart clench at the matter-of-fact way this 7-year-old discussed the trauma that had shaped her short life. Mia, do you remember what you told me on the roof about feeling like a burden? Mia nodded. I want you to understand something very important. Rick told you those things because he was trying to control your mommy. When people want to control someone, they make them feel bad about themselves, but none of what Rick said was true. I know that now, Mia said solemnly, because you showed us that we're not burdens, we're treasures. David looked at Carmen, whose eyes were filled with tears again. She's right, Carmen. You and your children aren't burdens to anyone. You're treasures that Rick tried to steal and hide away. The elevator chimed, and Patricia Kane stepped into the penthouse. She was a formidable woman in her 50s, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had successfully prosecuted dozens of trafficking cases. David, she said briskly, then turned to Carmen. Mrs. Rodriguez, I understand you and your children are in danger. I need to hear everything about your situation with Rick Morrison, starting from the beginning. As Carmen began telling her story to Patricia, David stepped out onto his balcony to make another call. Looking down at the city below, he thought about the incredible series of events that had brought them to this moment. A parking garage 5 years ago, a broken door lock tonight, a misdirected phone call, and 2 children desperate enough to climb to the roof of a 100-story building. Carmen Rodriguez had saved his life once before. Now he was going to make sure Rick Morrison never hurt her family again. And if he was being honest with himself, he was also going to make sure that he never lost Carmen Rodriguez again. For the next hour, Patricia Kane methodically interviewed Carmen while David arranged for additional security and called in favors from contacts in law enforcement. Mia had fallen asleep on the couch with Tommy, both children finally at peace for the first time in months. Mrs. Rodriguez, Patricia said, reviewing her notes, based on what you've told me, Rick Morrison has committed multiple federal crimes. The debt bondage, document theft, labor trafficking, and financial exploitation constitute a clear case of human trafficking under federal law. Carmen still looked uncertain. But Patricia, I wasn't locked in a room or chained up. I could leave for work. Carmen, modern trafficking rarely involves physical chains. Rick controlled you through debt manipulation, document theft, threats of homelessness, and by holding your children's welfare hostage to your compliance. That's just as effective as physical restraints. David joined them at the conference table, having finished his calls. Patricia, what's our immediate situation with Rick downstairs? He's escalated to claiming that Carmen has violated a legal contract and that he has the right to recover his investment. He's also claiming that she's mentally unstable and that the children aren't safe with her. Carmen gasped. He can't do that. I would never hurt my children. He's not claiming you would hurt them intentionally, Patricia said gently. He's positioning himself as their concerned protector, saying that your debt problems and emotional instability make you an unfit guardian. It's a common tactic traffickers use to maintain control. David felt his anger building, but forced himself to think strategically. Patricia, what are our options? We have several paths forward. First, we need to get Carmen and the children into protective custody while we build a case against Rick. Second, we need to secure those documents Rick is holding, Carmen's identification papers and the children's birth certificates. Third, we need to involve the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. The FBI? Carmen looked terrified. Won't they think I'm a criminal too? Carmen, you're the victim here, David said firmly. But Patricia, what about the immediate threat? Rick isn't going to just go away. Patricia's phone buzzed with a text message. She read it and frowned. David, That contact you asked me to call at the FBI, Agent Sarah Chen, is on her way up. She wants to interview Carmen tonight. Tonight? Carmen asked, panic creeping into her voice. The sooner we get your statement on record, the better, Patricia explained, and Agent Chen specializes in trafficking cases involving debt bondage. She's seen situations like yours before. Before Carmen could respond, David's building security called again. This time the news was more alarming. Mr. Sterling, we have a problem. Morrison and his associates have left the building, but they've positioned themselves across the street. They appear to be watching the exits. Should we call the police? David looked at Patricia, who nodded grimly. Yes, call the police. Tell them we have a human trafficking victim in protective custody and that her trafficker is attempting to intimidate her into returning. Carmen was shaking now. David, what if Rick tries to hurt us? What if he comes after the children? He won't get near you, David said with quiet certainty. Carmen, I have resources Rick can't match, and I'm not going to let him hurt you or your children ever again. The elevator chimed and Agent Sarah Chen stepped into the penthouse. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with dangerous situations. Mrs. Rodriguez, she said, approaching Carmen directly. I'm Agent Chen, with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. I understand you and your children have been victims of trafficking through debt bondage. Yes, ma'am, Carmen said nervously. I want you to know that you're not in any trouble. My job is to help trafficking victims and prosecute the people who exploit them. Can you tell me about Rick Morrison? Over the next 2 hours, Agent Chen took Carmen through the most detailed account yet of her relationship with Rick. The picture that emerged was even more disturbing than David had initially understood. Rick hadn't just been exploiting Carmen financially. He had been running a sophisticated operation, targeting vulnerable women, recent widows, immigrants, single mothers in financial crisis. The debt agreements were carefully crafted to look legal while creating situations of permanent bondage. Mrs. Rodriguez, Agent Chen said, you mentioned that Rick's business associates stayed at your apartment and that you were required to provide services for them. Can you be more specific about what those services included? Carmen looked uncomfortable, but answered honestly. I had to clean their rooms, serve meals, do laundry, sometimes work as late as 2 a.m. cleaning up after their meetings. One time, Rick made me drive one of his associates to a meeting at 3 a.m. because the man had been drinking. Were you ever asked to do anything of a sexual nature? No, never that. But Rick made it clear that my services were negotiable. One associate offered Rick $5,000 for what he called extended housekeeping services. Rick declined, but he made sure I heard the conversation. Agent Chen made notes. This pattern of escalating demands and implied threats is typical of trafficking operations. Rick was grooming you for more serious exploitation. David felt sick at the implications. Agent Chen, how many other women has Rick done this to? Based on our preliminary investigation, we believe Rick Morrison is part of a network that has trafficked at least 12 women over the past 5 years. Mrs. Rodriguez may have escaped before the worst escalation, but others weren't as fortunate. Carmen put her hand over her mouth in shock. Other women? Other families like mine? Yes, and your testimony will be crucial in helping us prosecute not just Rick, but the entire network. Patricia leaned forward. Agent Chen, what's the timeline for this case? We've been building a case against this network for 8 months. Mrs. Rodriguez's testimony could be the key piece. We need to move forward with arrests. If she's willing to cooperate, we could have warrants issued within the week. What about Rick's immediate threats? David asked. He's positioned himself across the street watching the building. Agent Chen smiled grimly. That was his mistake. By publicly claiming ownership over Mrs. Rodriguez and demanding her return, he's provided evidence of his trafficking activities. We'll have him in custody within the hour. Yiri. True to her word, Agent Chen made a series of phone calls, and within 45 minutes, David's security reported that Rick Morrison and his associates had been arrested across the street from Sterling Tower. Carmen watched the police cars from David's windows, tears streaming down her face. "Is it really over?" she asked. "The immediate threat is over," Agent Chen said. "But Carmen, I need you to understand that this case will likely take 12 to 18 months to fully resolve. There will be court appearances, testimonies, and Rick's defense team will try to discredit your story. I'll be with you through all of it," David said firmly. "You won't face this alone." Agent Chen looked between David and Carmen with interest. "Mr. Sterling, can I ask about your relationship with Mrs. Rodriguez? The prosecutor will need to understand why you're involved in this case." David told Agent Chen about the parking garage incident 5 years earlier, and her expression shifted to one of amazement. "So Mrs. Rodriguez saved your life, then unknowingly ended up working in your building, and her daughter's crisis call led to you discovering her trafficking situation." "That's exactly what happened," David confirmed. That's an incredible set of coincidences." "I don't think they were coincidences," David said quietly, looking at Carmen and her sleeping children. "I think some things are meant to be." As Agent Chen and Patricia prepared to leave, having arranged for federal protection for Carmen and the children, Agent Chen turned back to Carmen. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I want you to know that what you did tonight, calling for help, agreeing to testify, you probably saved other women from going through what you experienced. That takes tremendous courage." Carmen looked at her children, then at David, then back at Agent Chen. "My daughter was prepared to die rather than continue living as what she thought was a burden. If my story can prevent other children from feeling that way, then I'll tell it as many times as necessary." After the officials left, David, Carmen, and the children were finally alone in the penthouse. Mia had woken up during the commotion and was now sitting at David's dining table, drawing pictures, while Tommy played with blocks David had quickly purchased from an all-night delivery service. "David," Carmen said softly, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done tonight. Carmen, you saved my life 5 years ago. Tonight, you let me return the favor. We're even." Carmen shook her head. "We're not even. What you did tonight, taking in 3 strangers, putting yourself at risk, using your resources to protect us, that goes far beyond repaying a debt." David was quiet for a moment, watching Tommy stack blocks, while Mia drew what appeared to be a picture of their family. 4 figures standing together under a rainbow. "Carmen, can I tell you something?" David said finally. "Of course. For 5 years I've been successful in business, but I've been empty in life. I built wealth, achieved goals, won awards, but I was missing the thing that makes success meaningful." "What's that?" "People to share it with, a family to protect, a purpose beyond just making money." David looked at Carmen directly. "Tonight, for the first time in 5 years, I felt like my life had real meaning again." Carmen felt tears welling up in her eyes. "David, you barely know us. How can you be sure we're worth disrupting your entire life?" "Because I've seen who you really are, Carmen. You stayed with a bleeding stranger in a parking garage because it was the right thing to do. You endured 2 years of abuse and exploitation to keep your children safe. Tonight, you agreed to testify against dangerous criminals to protect other women you'll never meet. You're exactly the kind of person I want in my life." Mia looked up from her drawing. "David, are you going to marry Mommy now?" Both David and Carmen froze, caught off guard by the 7-year-old's directness. "Mia," Carmen said quickly, "grown-ups don't just get married because they like each other. It's more complicated than that." But David was studying Carmen's face carefully. "Is it, though? Carmen, I know this is overwhelming and far too fast. I know you need time to heal from what Rick put you through, but I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you and your children." Carmen stared at him in shock. "David, we've known each other for one night." "No," David said gently. "We've known each other for 5 years. Tonight just reminded us of what we mean to each other." Carmen was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. Finally, she spoke. "David, what you're offering, it's not just help, is it? It's a completely different life. Yes, a life where you make your own decisions about money, food, work, and everything else. A life where your children grow up knowing they're treasures, not burdens. A life where you never have to hide who you are or apologize for taking up space." Carmen looked around David's beautiful penthouse, then at her children, who seemed happier and more relaxed than they'd been in months. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" she asked. David smiled. "I get to spend my life with the woman who taught me what courage looks like, and with 2 children who remind me what really matters. I get to build something meaningful instead of just accumulating wealth. I get to be the man that 7-year-old girl on the rooftop believed I could be." Carmen felt something shift inside her, hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. "David, I'm scared. I've been controlled for so long, I don't even know how to make decisions for myself anymore." "Then we'll figure it out together," David said simply. "One decision at a time, one day at a time. No pressure, no timeline, no strings attached. Just us figuring out what comes next." Mia held up her drawing. "Look, I drew our new family." David and Carmen looked at the picture. 4 stick figures holding hands under a bright rainbow with David plus Mommy plus MIA plus Tommy = family written in 7-year-old handwriting across the bottom. "What do you think, Mommy?" Mia asked. "Does it look right?" Carmen looked at her daughter's artwork, then at David, who was holding Tommy and making the baby laugh by making silly faces. "You know what, mija," Carmen said softly. "I think it looks perfect." 18 months later, Carmen stood in the witness box of a federal courthouse, facing Rick Morrison for the final time. He looked diminished somehow, sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his usual swagger replaced by the defeated posture of a man whose carefully constructed criminal empire had collapsed around him. The federal investigation had indeed revealed that Rick was part of a sophisticated trafficking network that had exploited dozens of women across 3 states. Carmen's testimony had been the keystone that brought down the entire operation. "Mrs. Sterling," the prosecutor said, and Carmen still felt a small thrill at hearing her new name. "Can you tell the court what your life was like under the defendant's control?" Carmen took a breath, drawing strength from the sight of David sitting in the gallery with 8-year-old Mia and 2-year-old Tommy, who was now walking and chattering constantly. David had legally adopted both children 6 months earlier, after he and Carmen married in a small ceremony in the penthouse. "Rick Morrison systematically destroyed my independence and sense of self-worth," Carmen began. "He used fraudulent debt agreements to trap me in a situation where I had no financial autonomy, no freedom of movement, and no control over my children's welfare. He forced me to provide labor services to his criminal associates under the threat that my children and I would become homeless if I refused." "Can you describe the nature of these labor services?" "I was required to clean, cook, serve meals, and provide housekeeping services for men who came to our apartment for what I now understand were criminal business meetings. I worked sometimes 20 hours a day between my outside job and the services Rick demanded. I was never compensated for this work. Rick claimed it was part of my debt repayment." "Did the defendant ever threaten you directly?" "Rick was too smart for direct threats. Instead, he created a psychological environment where I believed that any resistance would result in my children and me being thrown out on the street. He kept detailed financial records showing that we owed him increasingly large amounts of money, making it seem impossible to ever escape the situation. Rick's defense attorney stood to object, but Carmen continued before he could speak. But the worst part wasn't the work or the financial control. The worst part was watching my children internalize the message that they were burdens, that they were too expensive to deserve basic necessities like food and shelter. My 7-year-old daughter became so convinced that she and her baby brother were worthless that she climbed to the top of a 100-story building and considered jumping rather than continuing to be what she thought was a problem for our family. Several jury members looked shocked, and Carmen saw one woman wipe away tears. "Mrs. Sterling, how has your life changed since escaping the defendant's control?" Carmen looked at her family in the gallery, then back at the jury. "I remembered who I really was. Before Rick, I was a woman who would stay with a bleeding stranger in a parking garage because it was the right thing to do. I was someone who worked hard, made my own decisions, and took pride in providing for my family. Rick had made me forget all of that." "And what happened after you were freed from this situation?" "I discovered that the stranger whose life I had saved 5 years earlier was David Sterling, the man who answered my daughter's desperate phone call that night. Through his help and the support of federal agents, I was able to escape Rick's control and rebuild my life." The prosecutor smiled. "Can you tell the court about your life now?" "I work as a victim's advocate, helping other trafficking survivors navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives. My children are thriving. My daughter Mia is now in 3rd grade and loves school, and my son Tommy is learning to speak both English and Spanish. I make my own decisions about money, work, and my family's future. Most importantly, my children now know they are treasures, not burdens. One final question, Mrs. Sterling. Do you believe the defendant poses a continued threat to vulnerable women?" Carmen looked directly at Rick Morrison, seeing him clearly for the first time without fear. "Rick Morrison is a predator who targets women at their most vulnerable moments, when they're grieving, facing homelessness, or desperate to provide for their children. He's sophisticated, manipulative, and patient. If he's released, he will absolutely find new victims to exploit. He's not sorry for what he did. He's only sorry he got caught." The trial lasted 3 more days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The FBI had built an ironclad case, with testimony from 8 victims and evidence of systematic trafficking operations across state lines. Rick and his associates were convicted on multiple counts of human trafficking, conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering. Rick received a 25-year federal sentence without possibility of parole. As Carmen walked down the courthouse steps with David and the children, she felt truly free for the first time in years. "Mommy," Mia said, tugging on Carmen's dress, "does this mean the bad man can never hurt us again?" "Never again, mija," Carmen confirmed. "And now we can help make sure he can't hurt other families either." "Are we going to celebrate?" Tommy asked, having picked up this word from his sister's vocabulary. David laughed, swinging Tommy up onto his shoulders. "We're definitely going to celebrate. Ice cream for everyone." Later that evening, they sat on the balcony of their home, no longer David's penthouse, but the Sterling family home. They had moved to a house in the suburbs 6 months earlier, wanting a place where the children could have a yard to play in and Carmen could have a garden. "David," Carmen said, as they watched Tommy chase fireflies in the backyard while Mia read a book under the porch light, "do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I hadn't found you in that parking garage?" David considered the question, watching his son, for that's what Tommy was now, legally and in every way that mattered, giggle as he tried to catch the blinking insects. "I think about it all the time," he admitted, "but not in the way you might expect." "What do you mean?" "I used to think about all the business achievements I wouldn't have accomplished, the deals I wouldn't have made, the money I wouldn't have earned. But now I realize that none of those things would have mattered without this." He gestured toward their children, their home, their life together. Carmen smiled, taking his hand. I used to think that night was about me saving you, but I think it was really about both of us being exactly where we needed to be when we needed to be there. Mommy! Daddy! Mia called from the yard, using the name she'd started calling David after the adoption was finalized. Come look, Tommy caught a firefly. They walked down to where Tommy was standing with his small hands cupped carefully, his eyes wide with wonder as the firefly's light blinked through his fingers. Let it go, buddy, David said gently. Beautiful things are meant to be free. Tommy opened his hands, and they all watched as the firefly blinked once more and flew away into the gathering darkness. Just like us, Carmen said softly, squeezing David's hand. Just like us, he agreed. 2 years after the trial, Carmen stood in front of a room full of social workers, law enforcement officers, and victim advocates, delivering a presentation on recognizing signs of trafficking through debt bondage. She had become one of the leading experts on this form of exploitation, helping train professionals across the country. The key thing to understand, Carmen explained to her audience, is that modern trafficking rarely looks like what you see in movies. There are no chains, no locked doors, no obvious signs of captivity. Instead, traffickers use psychological control, false debt manipulation, and threats to family members to maintain power over their victims. Lee, after her presentation, a young social worker approached her during the coffee break. Mrs. Sterling, I have a case that sounds very similar to what you experienced. A woman with 2 small children, living with a man who claims she owes him money for helping her family, forcing her to work for his friends. Carmen felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always came when she encountered a new victim. Tell me everything, she said. 3 hours later, Carmen was on the phone with Agent Chen, now the head of the Regional Trafficking Task Force, arranging for protective custody for another family caught in the same web that had once trapped her. That's the 14th case this year that you've identified, Agent Chen told her. Carmen, you've become one of our most valuable assets in fighting this type of trafficking. When Carmen arrived home that evening, she found David in the kitchen, helping 9-year-old Mia with her math homework, while 3-year-old Tommy played with blocks at their feet. How was the training today? David asked, looking up from Mia's division problems. We may have saved another family, Carmen said, feeling the satisfaction that always came with this work. A mother with 2 young children, very similar to my situation with Rick. Will you have to testify again? Mia asked. Over the years, she had come to understand more about her mother's work and took pride in how Carmen helped other families. Probably, Mija. Is that okay with you? It's more than okay, Mia said firmly. You're like a superhero, saving families from bad people. David smiled at his daughter's assessment. She's not wrong. Carmen, you've helped prosecute 12 trafficking networks in the past 2 years. You've personally helped 43 families escape situations like ours. Our work isn't done until no family has to go through what we went through, Carmen said, settling onto the floor to play with Tommy, who immediately climbed into her lap. Mama, Tommy said. He still called her Mama while calling David Daddy, a distinction that felt natural to their blended family. Tell me the story about the tall building again. It had become Tommy's favorite bedtime story, though Carmen had adapted it into a tale about a brave little girl who called for help when her family needed it most, and how that call brought them all together. Once upon a time, Carmen began, there was a little girl named Mia who loved her baby brother so much that she was willing to do anything to keep him safe. As she told the story, David watched his family with the same sense of wonder he'd felt that first night on the rooftop. Carmen had blossomed into a confident, powerful advocate for other victims. Mia had grown into a thoughtful, compassionate child who wanted to become a lawyer so she could help families like Mama does. Tommy was a happy, chattering 3-year-old who had never known a day of want or uncertainty. Later, after the children were in bed, David and Carmen sat together on their back porch, watching the stars come out over their quiet suburban neighborhood. "David," Carmen said, "can I ask you something I've never asked before?" "Anything. Do you ever regret it? Taking on a ready-made family with all the complications that came with us? Your life was so much simpler before." David was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "Carmen, do you know what I was doing the night before Mia called me?" "Working late, I assume." "I was sitting in my penthouse apartment, looking out at the city, feeling completely empty despite having everything money could buy. I was successful, wealthy, accomplished, and utterly alone. I'd been thinking about what the point of it all was." Carmen turned to look at him in the moonlight. "Then Mia called, and within a few hours, I understood what I'd been missing. Purpose, family, love. The chance to use my resources for something that truly mattered." David took her hand. "Carmen, you and the children didn't complicate my life. You completed it. Even with all the court appearances, the security concerns, the media attention when the trafficking case made national news. Especially because of all that. Carmen, I've been able to help dozens of trafficking victims because of what I learned from your case. I've funded 3 safe houses, sponsored legislation to strengthen trafficking laws, and supported other survivors in rebuilding their lives. None of that would have happened without you." Carmen leaned against David's shoulder, thinking about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What's that?" "That night in the parking garage 5 years before Mia's call. What if I had just called 911 and left? What if I hadn't stayed with you?" "But you did stay." "That's who you are, Carmen. You're the person who doesn't walk away when someone needs help. And you're the person who answered a little girl's desperate call and changed 3 lives forever." From inside the house, they could hear Mia reading a bedtime story to Tommy. She had started this tradition on her own, wanting to help her little brother learn to love books the way she did. "David," Carmen said softly, "I have something to tell you." "What's that?" "I'm pregnant." David nearly dropped his coffee mug. "Pregnant? Are you? How do you feel about that?" Carmen smiled at his flustered reaction. "I'm happy, scared but happy. After everything we've been through, this baby will be born into nothing but love and security. This child will never doubt for a single day that they're wanted and treasured." David set down his mug and pulled Carmen into his arms. "A baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" Carmen asked, suddenly nervous. "I'm beyond happy. I'm grateful. Carmen, 5 years ago, I was a successful but empty man who nearly died alone in a parking garage. Now, I'm going to be a father to 4 children and married to the most incredible woman I've ever met. How could I be anything but grateful?" Later that night, as they lay in bed listening to the quiet sounds of their children sleeping peacefully down the hall, Carmen thought about how far they had all come. "David," she whispered in the darkness. Thank you for answering your phone that night. Thank you for teaching me what love looks like," he replied. And as they drifted off to sleep, Carmen Rodriguez Sterling, survivor, advocate, mother, and wife, smiled to herself, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with someone willing to help a stranger in their darkest moment. The next morning, Mia bounced into their bedroom with Tommy right behind her, as had become their weekend tradition. "Good morning, Mama and Daddy," Mia announced. "Tommy and I made you breakfast." Carmen and David exchanged amused glances, both thinking about the breakfast that likely awaited them. Probably cereal with too much milk and toast that was either burnt or barely warm. "We have some exciting news to share with you two," David said, as they all settled onto the bed together. "Are we getting a puppy?" Tommy asked hopefully. "Even better," Carmen said, taking both children's hands. "You're going to be a big sister and big brother to a new baby." Mia's eyes went wide. "Really? A real baby?" "A real baby," Carmen confirmed. "Will the baby sleep in my room?" Tommy asked. "The baby will have their own room, but you'll both get to help take care of them," David explained. Mia was quiet for a moment, processing this news. Then she looked at Carmen with her serious 9-year-old eyes. "Mama, this baby is going to be so lucky." "Why is that, Mija?" "Because they'll never have to be scared or hungry or think they're not wanted. They'll be born into our family, where everyone is loved and safe." Carmen felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, baby, this little one will be born into nothing but love." Tommy patted Carmen's still flat stomach gently. "Hi, baby," he said. "I'm your big brother Tommy. We're going to have so much fun together." As David watched his family, his wife, his children, and the new life growing inside Carmen, he marveled at the incredible chain of events that had brought them all together. A parking garage, a misdirected phone call, a broken door lock, and 2 children brave enough to climb 98 flights of stairs in search of hope. "What are you thinking about?" Carmen asked, noticing his expression. "I'm thinking about how the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to help each other," David said. "You chose to help me in that parking garage. Mia chose to call for help when she was desperate. I chose to answer that call. Every choice led us to this moment. And now we get to teach our children to make those same choices," Carmen said. "To help strangers who need it," Mia added, understanding the lesson. "To be brave when things are scary," Tommy contributed. "And to never give up hope that things can get better," Carmen finished. David pulled his family close, thinking about the future that stretched ahead of them, more children to love and protect, more families to help through Carmen's advocacy work, more chances to make a difference in the world. "I love you all so much," he said simply. "We love you too, Daddy," Mia and Tommy said in unison. "Forever and always," Carmen added, echoing the promise David had made to Mia that first night on the rooftop. "Forever and always," the whole family repeated together. And as the morning sun streamed through the windows of their home, the Sterling family began another day of their incredible journey together. A journey that had started with 2 strangers helping each other in their darkest moments, and had bloomed into a love story that would last for generations.